But since I couldn't finish my pitch, maybe I just talk a bit about the sustainability model, which I think is quite important and unique. And then maybe we have questions if the group is okay with that, since we're quite a small group as well.
I think let's go ahead with what you think is correct. And if you have questions, you can just post them in the chat box and we'll take it up. Salonie, whenever
and if you can also have your name, that'll be excellent. I think
yeah.
All right. So I did want to share about our sustainability model because ultimately for any sort of platform cooperative, achieving sustainability is critical. And for us, sustainability isn't just in terms of finances, which of course is super important, but also in terms of women's decision-making. Oh, it says breakout groups will close in 55 seconds. Sorry.
You carry on, there might be a glitch.
All right. And the model that we have figured out at SEWA Cooperative Federation is that the worker cooperatives need to remain small and they need to remain localized, because you could scale one cooperative, and that could become financially viable. But what often happens is that women lose their ownership and women lose their voice in such large scale cooperatives. So what allows for scale in this model, in our model, is the federative structure, with us acting as aggregators in the market and also in the space of policy and advocacy to enable, say, ultimately decent working conditions for workers. For example, we've been advocating for an increased quota for women's enterprises with the government e-marketplace, which is currently at a very low 3%. We've also been advocating. We are not just able to say aggregate and allow for scale for these small cooperatives in a more sustainable manner, because this way the base is very strong and robust, but we also are then able to advocate with both the market, with the private sector, but also with the public sector. So we've been advocating with the government e-marketplace to increase the quota for women's enterprises, which is currently at 3%. We've been advocating for a decrease in commissions, which we heard in the main sessions has been an immense issue, particularly for women workers. We've also been advocating for more visibility and more subsidies also for these cooperatives. This is a model that SEWA has developed over, say, 50 years now. And we believe this is a model that will enable us to achieve full employment and self-reliance, and particularly importantly in this new sort of digital gig economy. So I'll pause there and I'll have you ask questions.
I don't see any questions, but are you focusing on any particular sector, or is it going to be open to everyone?
So there are two things. One thing is at the aggregate sort of marketplace is something we've incorporated in the past year, or this year actually. So that is a platform called SEWA Samarth that has both products and services by women's cooperatives at the federation level. And that's something we're trying out. And this is both an online model through a digital marketplace, but also an offline model in the B2B and the B2C space, both online and offline, right? But in terms of particular sort of sector-specific work, yeah, we are working in two sectors, more focused in the agriculture sector, like I mentioned, to enable supply chain management. And we see technology can be an enabler here. So, you know, usually when you think of platforms, you think of a very sophisticated application that people download on their phones. And we're not saying that, because we don't think that's the reality of these women that we're working with. They don't have smartphones. They don't have access to money to put into their phones. They often don't have access because of infrastructure issues to network or signal, etc. So this is not where the women are. So sort of hybrid model, which may not be app mediated, but includes aspects, or includes, say, the enabling aspects of digital technologies and data governance to enable better supply chain management and to enable better market engagement. Because in agriculture, particularly, we've seen that women are sort of pushed to the laborious tasks of agriculture, the sowing, the harvesting, all the manual work, which men refuse to do. And when it comes to the market side, which is where the money is, the women are invisible. So we hope that this platform sort of mediates that information gap, that mobility gap, that access gap for women. We've also been working in the domestic work sector through a cooperative of domestic workers in Ahmedabad city. We did a few co-design sessions with them and some interesting insights came out. Feroz knows because we've written a paper about this together, which is due to be published soon. But we found that some of the elements that domestic workers outlined had to do with what we've been hearing. So more information on customers because they don't know whose house they're going to. They don't know what work they're going to be engaged with. Some sort of ability for them to onboard new workers because they see this as super important and they see this as something that the platform could enable. A very specific example was one domestic worker told me that, I travel by bus every day and there's so many other domestic workers traveling with me on that bus. I start talking about my cooperative. So I want to share this information very quickly with those who are responsible for onboarding new workers, and maybe a platform can help me to do that. So these aspects that, you wouldn't think of are something that workers actually want, and we need to meet them there with design.
Yeah, sounds exciting. There's a question. So Neha has a question for you in the chat box.
Yeah. So so this, thanks Neha. So something we're doing, like I mentioned, was awareness on just what platforms are, what is data, what is the importance of data. And I'll use an example again here, but the way you and I understand data is not something that we've seen the informal women workers do. There is no basic understanding of what data is, and therefore there is no understanding of, say, the potential, both detrimental ways and beneficial ways of what data is. Another example from our domestic workers session was, this is super sad, but a lot of employers have started installing CCTV cameras in the house so that they can keep a watch on domestic workers. So when we went to this workshop with the domestic workers and we asked them, what do you think about this? How do you think the cooperative can intervene here? They said, actually, we want the CCTV cameras because we're often accused of stealing. We're often accused of, picking up money and jewelry. And so if there is a video recording, we can actually use that as proof that we didn't do it. So that's how they thought of, having surveillance. And so to break it down and say, but you can think of who owns that data, who has access to that recording, etc. That is something where we need to start. So those are the kinds of conversations we're having at a very micro level when I say threats and benefits of using digital platforms. We understand that there's a huge potential that data brings, and that current platforms leverage to sort of bolster up their capital, and that cognitive access is something that we need to build with these workers. You're welcome.
And how do you work on actually disseminating this information? How does the information reach to women who need right. or are seeking help?
Our approach is very decentralized, which we feel is sort of the right way to approach this. You build community change makers, build leaders, and then when you reach the word through them is when the word is most effective. So we do have a group of grassroots trainers and we have modules and we have trainings, which we do take to the members and also put it later to the leaders. And then they translate it in their cooperatives and they translate it in their communities. And so when you have these champions, sort of the training sits better. That's our approach in delivering anything.
Any questions from the other participants? Just feel free to unmute and ask. I think that would be great, be more interactive.
Hi, I was wondering, perhaps I missed a little bit of information when you were talking about domestic service platforms, which we are very interested in because we're studying them in Argentina. You talk about a session with domestic workers. It is because you are planning to design a cooperative platform for domestic workers. Is that the idea? Or these women are already working in commercial platforms of the sector?
So I think the right answer is we don't know. And we want the answer to come from the workers themselves in how they see it as being useful. So where we are currently is we have cooperatives of domestic workers right now, and we've held these sort of co-design sessions with them, and they've outlined some elements that they would like in such a platform were it to be created. I think the way we understand platform co-ops is slightly different. Like I said, we're not looking at a fancy application because that's not where the women are. We're looking at digital technology sort of mediating the current processes of the cooperative. For example, they collect a lot of data on, sort of locations of where the workers are, where the customers are. They haven't been able to use this data effectively in matching workers with customers. And they think that an algorithm can solve this problem for them, which is right, it can. So coming in with these solutions and very, fundamentally keeping this data with the cooperative is something that we're trying to do. I don't know if that answers your question, but we're very much at the nascent stages.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
In terms of Feiruz's question, how is cell phone technology utilized in organizing? That's really interesting, Feiruz. There's sort of two responses to this. One is during COVID, like Uma had also written in the chat, we did use a lot of, with domestic workers and otherwise, use a lot of, say, WhatsApp, use a lot of social media to disseminate messages, information and awareness through these platforms. What we saw was that because these women were connected to the SEWA movement, to the cooperative movement already, they had benefits that workers who were not connected, didn't have. And those workers were able to see how the cooperative supported these domestic workers. And we saw an influx in the number of people, number of women who wanted to join the cooperative. So not really digital, but perhaps enabled by digital is how we saw an increase in, and this was specific to domestic workers, wanting to join the cooperative movement, wanting to join the collective movement. Currently, how we're using cell phone technology is, and because domestic workers are largely in the urban area, there is less issue in terms of access to networks. And domestic workers are slightly more mobile than other workers. We have a cadre of grassroots workers who are mobilizing in areas, in their communities, and quickly sort of relaying that information through their cell phones back to cooperative management that can optimize the way that these workers are then onboarded onto the cooperative. So it's a very sort of quote unquote primitive way of using cell phone technology, but it's something we find works. Interestingly, there is a current platform called Just Dial, which is in the service sector, which is a job listing platform, right? You can, it's a notice board where you can put up, what work you want or what work you provide, both, and customers and workers can look at this platform and engage with whatever they find necessary. So this cooperative of domestic workers actually advertised their services. They were looking at reaching the customer. They were looking at reaching the market. What happened was a lot of domestic workers saw this job listing, saw this advertisement on Just Dial, and they reached out to the cooperative saying, we're not customers, we're actually workers and we want to join the cooperative. So we found some domestic workers coming in through this platform and connecting with the cooperative. And I believe some of them did actually join the cooperative as well. So this was super interesting and something we didn't actually expect to happen.
That's quite, yeah, Just Dial is popular in India. I think that's the reason why it might have come through there. Any other questions?
If I can ask a question, this is Neha. I wanted to know something about, you mentioned in your presentation, Salonie, that there were some efforts that you're taking to co-design platforms, something on that line for cooperatives and supply chain management. So I wanted to know more about it. And also another question, how are you, let's say for digital platforms, how are you dealing with the intersection of social protection, like social security, let's say social security fund for informal women workforce, and how is that impacted by their employment through, let's say, apps, or let's say through the mobilization of digital economy. So if on these 2 points, if you could just elaborate.
So on the first question on supply chain management, this is an idea that we're, and I mentioned before, in the agriculture sector, trying to understand where technology can act as an enabler. We have a 3-year-long project with the Inclusive Design Research Center, if you've heard of them, in Canada. It's a project which looks at how AI-enabled technology can be used in supply chain management, particularly for women farmers cooperatives. We're in the first year of the project, and the idea is to, at the end of 3 years, is to have at least an idea, just a basic draft or a basic sketch of what a sustainable platform can look like in this space, which enables, exactly this supply chain management and value chain management, and links women farmers to aspects of agriculture that they otherwise have been left out of, and optimizes the use of data. So very nascent stages of this. Coming to your question on social protection, SEWA's philosophy is that if you have to reach full employment, if you have to get informal workers out of poverty sustainably, social protection is key. You can give a domestic worker a job and she can have money coming into her house every month. But as soon as she has a health emergency, she spends all of that money and she's back in the cycle of poverty. So unless you enable her insurance, enable her health, enable her childcare, she can't really engage with the labor market. So having this philosophy, we also have cooperatives in the SEWA ecosystem, which are in the space of social security. We have an insurance cooperative, we have a health cooperative, we have childcare cooperatives that run daycare centers. And these are things that we're linking along with our existing cooperatives to enable that, that aspect of social protection coming into each worker's life. These cooperatives themselves also have been using digital platforms to reach more workers. And maybe I can share some literature later on these cooperatives specifically. So just to, that's my sort of initial response to your question. But if you want to dig deeper, I'd be happy to answer.
I had sort of one more question, because the first one was quite good. The answer that you gave, I think it's moving towards formalization, let's say, I think for that purpose. And I had a question about redistribution. So I read about SEWA that they are also engaging men in let's say giving them leave, or so that they can also share childcare responsibilities. So are there any other sort of redistributing redistribution of unpaid work which has been, like, any efforts towards that that SEWA is also doing?
So the example of our childcare cooperative, I think, is important here. I am not sure what you mean when you say we give men leave. I'm not entirely sure what we.
Yeah, I think no, that was the Uruguay model that I referred to. That informal women workers are engaged, and then men are also engaged in order to share the domestic responsibilities.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, childcare cooperative would be one example of redistribution.
Yeah. So, but what we do there is we do engage men in just the, of them understanding that childcare is their work as well. So if there is a Mother's Day in the childcare cooperative, there's also a Father's Day, where men are taught about the importance of redistributing care work within their households. And we have seen men participate, in fact. And what we've also seen is that the childcare cooperatives enabled young girls in the household to stay in education. Because otherwise, if there's no childcare, it's the responsibility of the older daughter to take care of the young babies, right? But if there is childcare, she is able to then go to school. And this sort of childcare model that SEWA initiated also led to the Integrated Child Development Scheme, which is the ICDS, or the Anganwadi system in India. And we're continuing to advocate with the ICDS because we do see gaps in the way they link with childcare, but that's a whole other conversation. I think the thing I want to focus on here is that the cooperatives in the social protection space, like insurance, childcare, healthcare, we understand we can't compete with the government. We're not looking at that scale. What we want to do is we want to create best case models or sustainable models and showcase to the government, showcase to the state that it is possible to do this at scale. And that's what we've done with our childcare, is that the government has now scaled it up in a way that SEWA could never have. We don't have the resources, we don't have the reach. But that is our, I think that is our vision, also in terms of the cooperatives.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Neha. Any other questions from the other participants? We have about, I think, about 4 to 5 minutes more. Clearly not, but
so if no one has a question, can I go again?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I have you right now. So I also wanted to ask about the digital gender divide. So what are the efforts that are being made to upskilling for informal women workforce in with relevance to digital gender divide? And are you getting any support from the government in order to provide such skills?
So the digital divide is not just restricted to, say, the capacity or the skills, right? It starts from before that. It's access to technology. It's access to money to put into your phone. You know, if there's one phone in the household, it belongs to the man. We know this. So bridging that gap, and this is out of our hands, but enabling network in areas. So Uttarakhand members don't have network, or Nagaland members don't have network. So advocating with the government for also that. And also building the capacity to use these phones. That's where the skills come in. But not just in terms of our cooperative model, not just to use them for leisure, but also to see how you can use them for work. So we've created a sort of digital literacy toolkit where we cover very basic aspects of, what is a phone, how does it work, how do you pick up a call, how do you do conference call, then moving to how do you use a Google Meet to, meet your board members, how do you use Gmail, how do you use Zoom, how do you use WhatsApp for marketing. So enabling the use of technology through that. And we have been doing this for about 2 years now, catalyzed by COVID, as I said. The government has been receptive, let me say that, they have understood the importance of doing this work. And in spaces like with the government e-marketplace, they also came and gave us trainings. I think that's the extent of government in terms of bridging the gap on skill building with us currently.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Neha. Your questions were super interesting. I'm also curious about your background slightly, because you are super interested in this whole area. Would you like to share that with us or no?
Yeah, and I'm doing my PhD in labor law at in Germany right now, and I've been reading about SEWA also, and this is amazing that I get to talk with her. So mostly my background is from labor law perspective, but yeah, this is. So thank you so much, Salonie.
Salonie is super active on Twitter, and that's how we met and interacted. If you want, you can follow her, and she responds very quickly. So she's super swift.